questions. We're going to try to do that very briefly. I don't want to get bogged down in it, but it's also, we recognize that not everybody here is going to have a background in rabbinics. What we're doing is, at this point, we are mapping responsa. So the first question that I'm going to introduce is, what's a responsum? Responsum is the basic unit of data that we're dealing with. A responsum is basically a letter that was written in response to a question, that a letter written by a rabbi in response to a question posed by a lesser rabbi on some matter of Jewish law. So we took as an example a responsum in a collection called Hatam Sofer. It was written in the early 1800s. This is responsum number 156 in one of the 4 volumes of the Orach Chaim volume, which deals with daily life, the calendar, the ritual observance. And he writes it to a Rabbi Nathan, who's a rabbinical court judge in a place called Salem. And he writes it on the 23rd day of Tammuz in 5596. Okay, which is? So there's all kinds of questions here. First of all, when exactly is 23rd of Tammuz in 5596? And where exactly is Salem? I promise you, if you go to a contemporary map of Europe and look for the place called Salem, you will not find it. Okay. But these elements here, Salem, and the 23rd of Tammuz 5596, and Rabbi Nathan, those are the metadata. That's the metadata that we're going to want to pull together in order to try to generate something. Hatam Sofer is a known entity. So here's an example that was lifted from another collection, and you can see how it's laid out. So this is, we're working entirely in Hebrew. Our entire corpus is in Hebrew. And at the beginning, you have where he's writing from in the city of Mako, which is readily identified as a fairly well-known Jewish community in Hungary. So it's Moshe's family. Both Moshe's families are from Mako, or Makov, M-A-K-O, city in Hungary. Wednesday, the first day of Tammuz, Taf Reish Vav. So I can make a quick, on the fly, we're talking about July 1846. I can do that in my head. On a Wednesday in July in 1846. And here you have the introduction to the letter. It's written to a man named Israel, which is a fairly common diminutive of the name Yisrael, who's the rabbinical court judge in the community of Zenta. Vahagalil doesn't mean in the Galilee, but it means and the area and the surrounding villages. But you see that there are a lot of, every time you see this little apostrophe, it means that it's an abbreviation. So Av Beit Din de Kehila Kedosha Zenta, the rabbinical court chief of the holy community of Zenta. Fine. That's what the metadata looks like in the text. Much of this text has been digitized but isn't available. Most of this corpus hasn't been digitized at all. Fortunately, some of it has been digitized and is publicly available. What we're going to look at now is publicly available on a site called Sefaria, which is digitizing Hebrew texts. Now, it happens to be that this Hatam Sofer, Rabbi Moses Schreiber, who was the rabbi in Pressburg, which usually abbreviates Pei-Bet, which means PB, which you're also not going to find on a map of Europe today, not the PB and not even Pressburg. Nobody has ever tried to map out where he's writing his correspondence to create a republic, or what we like to call, I think Moshe introduced the term, an oligarchy of letters, or Moshe had a different term. It was we like oligarchy of letters either way. Nobody's tried to map the oligarchy of letters, and nobody has tried to map out how the borders of this oligarchy of letters are created over time. What does it look like at the beginning of his career? How does it develop beyond that? So Moshe Schur one of the things that he did was he created a date parser. So you get things like Rosh Chodesh Tammuz Tafresh Vav, or you have things like the 23rd of Tammuz 5596, and it spits out a Gregorian date, converts it into a Gregorian date. Now rabbis also did fancy things. They didn't always just write the date in Hebrew. Sometimes they embedded it in a numerical pattern. Sometimes they said they gave you the weekly Torah portion. Sometimes they didn't give you the regular name for it. They give you a clever, like a verse that shows up somewhere in the weekly Torah portion, and you have to know exactly where it uses that phrase. You have a lot of, Wittgensteinian play going on in the metadata itself. A lot of game playing, and these are the tools that rabbis are using in order to convey expertise or to show that they know their stuff, which is part of what's going on here, because there's an implied authority structure here. This authority structure was in no way formal. Okay? If Rabbi Nathan of Deutschkreuz is asking a question to Rabbi Moses Schreiber, it's not because he has to. There was no formal court of appeals. It's because he chooses to. He has a question that he doesn't want to answer on his own, or he can't answer on his own, and he's a free agent to ask whichever rabbinic expert he thinks will be able to handle it. So the way that the authority is constructed, not only are these responsa reflecting its authority, they're also constructing authority. Okay, so we created these parsers that Moshe had a little bit of fun, and earlier today these are the 9 examples that we have in our corpus that use today's date. So these are 9 responsa that were written on May 22nd, or that are dated to have been written on May 22nd, and that gives you also an idea of how, what kind of corpus we're talking about. If a day like May 22nd, which is one of 365 days, we have 9 responsa, that means that we've processed already on the order of magnitude of about 30,000 responsa, which is pretty good, but still a drop in the bucket. There are probably an order of magnitude of 1 million responsa like this. Okay, so we end up with lots of places, lots of names, lots of dates. One of the things about Hebrew is that in Hebrew we don't have standard orthography until relatively recent. So you could have places that have lots of different names, lots of different spellings of the same name. Right? We have places like Budapest, we have already like 30 different ways to spell Budapest. And I'm not talking about attestations to Budapest. I'm talking about ways to spell Budapest, abbreviations and different names and different neighborhoods. So there's that's another obstacle to overcome. So we have to create a gazetteer. And we have created a gazetteer of Hebrew spelling, variant place names. We have about 3,000 variants so far, and that continues to grow. That's the hardest work, because we got to do one by one. Okay, so now let's get to Moshe, the slide on Khatam Sofer. Khatam Sofer spreadsheet. It's not here? No, spreadsheet. Okay. Right. Okay. So the next step is we take all of the response of Khatam Sofer and we put it into a spreadsheet. So we have a reference number, which response it's in, and we've built scripts that look for particular place names, and those abbreviations become very important here, because you have like Kuf Kuf, Kila Kedosha, we can teach a script that the next string that comes after that is going to be a place name. Right? And then we have the Hebrew date as it's there, and then it converted into Gregorian. And then, finally, right, from there it goes into our gazetteer. This is what our gazetteer looks like. And you see that 3,000 entries. right? So Baia Mare, just Baia Mare, Romania, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different spellings. And then from there we can finally, once we've identified the places, we can finally map it out. So it turns out that Paybeck, Pressburg, is today's Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia, and Deutschkreuz is actually, Salem is actually Deutschkreuz. So how do you get from Salem to Deutschkreuz? Does anyone know?
Kreuz.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice.
Kreuz is the German word for a cross. Jews don't like talking about crosses. Brings up some bad memories. So instead of talking about Deutschkreuz, which means a German cross, talk about Salem, which means an image, which was the standard Yiddish word for a cross. Okay, Deutschkreuz itself was a significant community in this region, which is called Burgenland. In Yiddish, it was called the Sieben Gemeinden, because there were 7 major Jewish communities there, like Eisenstadt and Lachenbach and Salem and Mattersdorf, and I like to, or the Sheva Kehilot, I playfully like to call it the 7 dwarfs. Our map server is down right now, but okay. Finally, we can map out, this is what the map of the Khatam Sofer looks like. It's blue. It's a screen grab, so I can't do cool stuff with it, like moving it around, but that's what it looks like. And you see that it's really clustered in what's called Oberland, right? The northwestern part of what was then Hungary, which today is spread out across Hungary and Slovakia and Austria. And the next step is that once we do this with others, we can start comparing. And so the red is responsa written by a contemporary of Khatam Sofer named Rabbi Akiva Eger. They knew each other. In fact, even they were about the same age, but Rabbi Akiva Eger was Khatam Sofer's father-in-law. If you think that sounds a little bit creepy, you're not alone. It was Khatam Sofer's second wife was the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eger, and she was obviously much, much younger than him. And you can see that you're talking about almost 2 entirely different geographic regions, right? That their cultural reach, that their influence almost doesn't overlap. The only exceptions, right, where you have the larger red dots in Khatam Sofer land and the big blue dot in Rabbi Akiva Eger land, is the correspondence that they had between themselves, where they were writing to each other. Okay, and we can look at other things when we do this also. We can look at things like succession, right? When a major influential rabbi dies, who picks up after him? And we can compare contemporaries, we can look at how someone's reach expands during his lifetime, and we can look at what goes on in cultural borderlands. We can look at how migration impacts the shape of a rabbinic career. We can look at how persecution or major world events shape a rabbinic career, and we can talk about how succession plays out. Before turning the microphone over to Moshe, there was an anecdote that I want to tell that happened a couple of weeks ago. I was in Boston. I visited MIT. I gave a similar talk at MIT. And I had a meeting with the head of the Digital Humanities Lab there. And he said to me, what you guys are doing, that's exactly what I want our students to be doing. And I said, why are you looking at us? We're 2 guys. I'm a master's degree student with a midlife crisis, decided to go back to school after the age of 40. Right? Moshe is undergraduate in his early 20s. There are digital humanities projects that have multiple years and millions of dollars worth of funding. Why are you looking at us? And he said, well, that's exactly the point. I'm looking at you and I'm saying, I want to show our guys, I want to show our students that you don't need to have multi-year grants with millions of dollars of funding in order to do a serious digital humanities project. If you have passion, you have know-how, and you put it together, you can do something, you can make a contribution that that's worthwhile now. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing. You can take a smaller corpus and start working on it. But there's something that you yourselves can do. And the truth of the matter is that this is what this project grew out of. I'm going to talk a little bit about our history. First of all, our families, Moshe's great-grandfather and my grandfather were friends in Baltimore. And it's now gone to a 4th generation of friendship. Moshe's parents are very close friends of mine, and that's how I know Moshe. And it turned out, we realized that we had this shared passion for rabbinic, halachic history, and geography, and digital representation, and baseball. And what does baseball have to do with anything? Everything. And Moshe's going to pick up the story from there.
Yeah, so I want to touch on to the more crowdsourcing oriented parts in a moment. So the sort of the last component, when we have like disjunct sets, right? When you map disjunct sets, it's very easy to notice similarity because they're disjunct. You just look, oh, these do not overlap, they have nothing in common, right? Or they virtually have nothing, right? And so one of the things that we've been doing is when we have people who are fairly similar, right? And people who do have some overlap, and you have a confusing map of you have 2 layers of 300 points each. The eyeball test doesn't serve you as well anymore. So we use a cosine similarity system, right? So you can see, right? So here we have A and B, right? They're cities, right? So we turn it into a vector form, right? This is what it actually looks like. Now, outside that example, this is the real one, right? But then, more importantly, right, we can just get a score here, right? Cosine similarity, we run from 0 to 1. Actually, another baseball thing. In baseball metrics, there's an idea called reliability, right? If you want to see if something is a skill, then it ought to predict itself. Right? A skill, by definition, should be repeatable, right? Winning a Monopoly, when you're playing by the rules, has some elements of skill, right? If you see someone who wins 90% of the time when they're playing with the little sister, right, you know that they're cheating, and that there is a replicable skill in cheating, right? So we can if we do a chronological split of someone of their own corpus, right, we can see basically how similar is the first half of someone's career going to be to the second, right? And then that can sort of give us a benchmark. Well, if we've hit anywhere close, if we've hit close to that, we know that we really can't taxonomically justify dividing them, right? If you're about as similar as someone is to themselves, right, then you have to say, okay, this is clearly an atomic categorization here, right? One that ought not to be split, right? So that number for us is about 0.45, 0.4, and you can sort of see, like we map out these clusters here. Right? We did a post on this not so long ago, and how we can sort of identify, here sort of seeing 2 different types of Hungarians, and you can sort of see that they're all similar enough that they're the same thing, but you can sort of make up sort of 2 subspecies. Right, about like here. Here you can see those are Galician, those are Hungarian, and you can see it pretty clearly in the data. And so our inspiration for all of them was a crowdsourcing project, right? And that crowdsourcing project, I mean, really, was sort of a constellation of crowdsourcing projects. All having to do with baseball statistics. Since the 70s, there's been an organized effort on bringing statistical analysis to baseball, and in order to do this, right, they've launched some truly staggering, staggering, some really staggering crowdsourcing campaign. Yeah?
5 minutes, but
Okay.
try to listen
But
for...
so, for instance, but before you had the games on TV, right, and before you had reruns and clips, they used to write up every single thing that happened in the game, right? So they have this in machine readable form for close to every game going back 100 years, right? I can feed into my computer if I want to do statistical research. I can feed in machine readable forms of what happened 90 years ago, right? Game by game, right? People people blog about various statistical phenomena. But the most popular stat site, which has a huge selection of statistics that you can view, and also a very active blog of their own writers and a very active community blog, and to the degree, right, it becomes so successful to the degree that no one holds down a job at this blog anymore for more than 3 years because they're constantly being poached by actual professional teams to go run their billion-dollar businesses, right? And so this is sort of our idea. Our idea was we wanted to sort of take a look to a bit and just try to apply sort of these statistical measures and these statistical measures. And here's where crowdsourcing comes in for our view, right? At the moment, we have limitations in terms of material that's digitized, but we're going to be opening up our own crowdsourcing, right? So you can see basically, I want to tag something, so there you go. Right. So if it'll post something. No data. Category timeout. So this is just not a question, right? We would say this part is really key. The metadata we hope to eventually replace with better OCR once we have one that will work on low quality scan. But in order to start understanding how authority works and what's going on in these books on a massive level, we need to be able to say concretely, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with real questions? Are we dealing with not questions? Are we dealing with two friends running a bunch of letters back and forth? We need to have responsive by responsive categorization in order to do this, right? And we expand that. We want to expand our ability to categorize and to get a taxonomy of this, which again is possible only with human tagging. We want to start looking at really deep parts of content themselves. Our question, Lakula and Lachumra. We can start using random sampling and from a large enough corpus, we could start to get actual answers to the kind of question that people talk about in the coffee room all the time in the yeshiva, like who's more Mako, who's more Machmir. But we can start to break all these things down. But we can see how things evolve over time, right? We want to start tackling citation and see how someone's perceived authority evolves over time, like after they're dead. Like most of these books are published posthumously. Right? How does someone's authority in real life translate into their legacy? Right? And we sort of have no clue about most of these, and we want to expand this moving forward and see where it will take us. Anyway?
Questions?
Actually, live tweeted for the first time all conference, but that was because I was paying a lot of attention, believe it or not. Sometimes when you live tweet, you worry that you're not sort of absorbing it. One thing that I found really fascinating to me is that you're attempting to use very rigorous mathematical cosine similarity, identifying all the ways in which these elements of your analysis interact and have aspects, and then grouping, identifying in the matrix that you identified. Have you done more abstract visual representations of these same kinds of properties? Have you explored other things besides the matrix to identify where some of these commonalities may be? I saw that the map exists. Have you thought about ways that you might add dimensionality to the map or use the map as more than a top-down display of regionality and add this metadata to the map in such a way that you're using additional aspects of the space to communicate some of those more rigorous mathematical insights that you're attempting?
Right. All right. So one of the things we do for that, which I can't show sadly because the thing is down, but when we look at someone who has a particularly interesting career arc, right, and particularly unexpected one. So I like to plot that one out. Essentially, I don't think it's in some as an epidemic map, right? You know, when on the news, like you're seeing like the red splotches that pop out. New case of Ebola in Ghana or whatever, right? And you can see, they show like the time moving along and the dots popping out, and so we do that also.
Okay. I'm just going to give one example here. Right here we have a linear representation of the response of a rabbi named Yaakov Ettlinger by year, and he has a very odd career arc. Right? He barely is writing any response until the mid-1840s, and then the majority of the responses that he's going to write over his entire career, he writes over the course of one decade, from about 1845 until about 1855, and then he plateaus for the rest of his career. You usually don't see something like that. Okay, and in terms of who he's reaching, he's reaching a far wider territory than anybody else that we've mapped in terms of just, it's not central. So it turns out, what was this? In 1845, he was the co-founder of a journal called Shomer Tzion Ne'eman, which was sort of like the rabbinic listserv of its day, where rabbis would bat around questions that they had or that they wanted to discuss. He was the editor, so whenever he had something to contribute to the conversation, he would publish it in his journal. It was a monthly journal. Then, later on in his career, he took everything that he had published there, he looked for the original writer of the query, he put that in as the question, as though the question was coming to him from this place. So if we said that the entire thing is grassroots, the entire corpus is grassroots, this is what astroturfing looks like. Okay? So he's looking at it, and he puts it in as though he individually was asked this question and he individually responded to this question, when in fact that wasn't going on, but it worked because he's cited today as a major precedent, as a major halachic authority. So go figure.
Well, and just to complicate that one slight bit, I know that you show distance on the map, and a distance is a logical thing to display using a map. Could you look at the peak in this person's career and identify when someone is an early career expert, a mid-career expert, a late career expert, and determine whether those trends have to do with geography, local cultural differences, structure of those correspondences, or the way in which people gain their career status? Could you generalize that in the East, perhaps, the career arcs are generally different than in the West? Those sorts of interpretations.
So, ability to generalize career arcs is a little tough. But basically, sometimes it'll be fairly straightforward, just develop. Sometimes it'll be someone who probably wasn't supposed to be the main guy, but then like the guy who was supposed to be the main guy died, and then we just see a massive spike the next year. It's like someone's got to pick up the slack. And with regards to geography in terms of distance, one of our recurring findings has been that distance doesn't really matter. The area matters, right? Within, we don't see a clear distance-based distribution within an area, right? But then once you leave that area, then you start to see it. It's all about self-identification. It's not really about distance.
Meaning, to use as an example, you'll see Maharsham is writing everything in Galicia, but it's all over Galicia, and it's not beyond Galicia. So that would be an example.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not surprised that we took over the time because it's fascinating, but we'll have to keep the other questions for the break, and